There's a bit of paperwork that comes along with playing D&D, and I think that's okay. But if your character sheets look like you're doing homework or your taxes, that's going to be a hurdle for new players, especially kids who are excited to start telling awesome stories right away. So how can we make character sheets simpler or even fun? Well, of course, you start by making your Save versus Justin. If you saw my episode 0 video, then you know I started with basic Redbox D&D. Sadly, I no longer have the box itself, but I do remember that back then there were no character sheets in that box. Not even a page to photocopy. They tease you with a sample character sheet, but ultimately you were rolling up characters on binder paper. Or if you were cool, you might use graph paper. I wasn't cool. Because you had to write everything down, you really only wanted to include things that were essential to play. It was like your name and stats at the top, a place to keep track of hit points, spells if you had them, and then like half the paper was left to record all that gear and sweet loot. Eventually, I remember getting a pad of formatted character sheets, and that was pretty cool. Even cooler than graph paper. Then as you graduated to advanced D&D, creating characters started to take a while. I remember spending whole afternoons with my friends, or by myself, just making characters. And then, not playing. Sometimes never playing with those characters. It was still fun-ish, and I certainly went through a phase of poring over the rules and creating min-max characters, but at that point, I'd already committed to D&D as a hobby. I was hooked and diving headlong down into that rabbit hole. It was a great way to spend time between games while still engaging with the hobby. But not all new players are going to want to go there, and for some it can be a big turnoff and seem like a barrier to the fun. And character sheets haven't gotten much easier over time. So what can we do to help out those new players and introduce them to the hobby? Or just streamline the game based on the preferences of the players at your table? Well, one strategy is to start by going back to that original core concept of character creation and asking yourself, what's essential to play the kinds of games that our group wants to play? I love that OSR, or old school role-playing idea of the answer to your problem isn't on your character sheet. You should be able to quickly glance down at your sheet to reference what you need to roll, what resources you have, and how close you are to death. So whatever might be getting in the way of the fun at your table, consider ditching it. At the same time, there's an opportunity for your character sheets to be inspiring. I want it to highlight what makes my character awesome, and I also want it to look cool. And there are a lot of cool character sheets out there. A quick search on Etsy pulls up all kinds of amazing character sheets. I'm a big fan of a storefront called Azure and Copper that makes beautiful character sheets to fit most classes or campaign themes. These are great, but I would say there can be a fine line between beautiful and easy to use. You don't want your new players to get lost in their character sheet. Again, everything should be available at a glance. That said, once your group has finished a campaign or two, pulling out one of these can really get everybody super excited for the next adventure. And by then, the rules are probably becoming second nature anyway. At my table, we use most of the rules from 5th edition D&D, but we decided to ditch a few things from our character sheet. First off, we combined ability checks and saving throws. Next, we got rid of most of the skills, with the exception being perception. Then we trimmed out the backstory and personality fields. Stuff like alignment, ideals, bonds, flaws, instead just letting that stuff come out during the game. There's a site called Simple D&D that I'll provide a link to. As the name suggests, they've developed a simplified set of rules for D&D, along with a custom character sheet. That sheet starts to strike the right balance we were hoping for at our table. There's a number of different sheets on the site, but I use the half-page version. In our game, since we're getting rid of most skills, I wanted there to be some visual indicator on when to use stats instead. Inspired by this dyslexia-friendly character sheet I saw online, I added some icons and came up with this. If you still want to keep skills as part of your game, I found this one called Joe's Custom Character Sheet on the DM's Guild website that I really like. A lot of you might point out, and rightly so, that we seem to be playing some kind of 5th edition old school mashup. Yeah, pretty much, but I think it's still close enough to D&D that the players can have conversations with other gamers and say, yeah, we play D&D, and then start swapping great stories. By the way, I'm not opposed to skills in D&D. Plenty of the games I play in still use all the standard 5th edition rules. For my games with kids, it's just something we're ramping up on as we introduce new players to the game. That said, we just recently passed the halfway point in our Curse of Strahd campaign, and after everyone hit level 5, I took a poll. Who wants to add more of the standard D&D stuff like skills? Crickets, for now, and that included most of the adults. This means as the GM, you do have some extra work when characters level up to account for those missing elements and still provide some level of progression and getting cool new powers and abilities. Speaking of which, what about those spells? To help out there, we've been making good use of the spell cards published by Wizards of the Coast. At this point, I think they have decks of cards that cover all the spells in the player's handbook for each class. They're pretty straightforward. One side shows you the level of the spell, with the other giving you all the details you need for the most part. I think there's a couple cards that refer back to the player's handbook when they run out of room. These are a great way to offload some of the clutter that might go onto a character sheet, while at the same time giving the player a handy reference without having to crack open a rulebook. My son loves to play spellcasters. In fact, his first character ever was a wizard named Groovius. We used these spell cards with him and kept the ones he needed to pay attention to in one of these cool little spellbook card holders. You can find these on Amazon. I'll include a bunch of links below. They also have a deck for some martial powers and racial abilities, but sadly no cards for feats or class abilities. The trick with these cards is that you get one of each, so if you have multiple characters with overlapping spells, you might need to invest in more than one deck. I backed a Kickstarter a while back called Critical Core that also combines a lot of these ideas with the goal of making D&D approachable and potentially even used in therapy for neurodiverse players who might have autism spectrum disorder or attention deficit disorder. The game is based on 5th edition D&D, but adds all kinds of tools to address different ways to draw attention back to the game and make it easier to follow. This includes simplified and beautiful character sheets for pre-generated characters, along with spell and ability cards. I think they actually one-upped Wizards here by including class abilities, but the set is limited to pre-generated characters up to level 5, so you won't have a full library of all the spells and abilities in the player's handbook. But Justin, you talked about stats and abilities and spells, but what about all the cool stuff our characters want to carry around? Not to mention all the stuff they're going to pick up as they adventure and grow into legendary heroes. Well, nothing says homework like a spreadsheet of gear and encumbrance, so in the next video, let's try to figure that out. Until then, drop a comment or click on all the things to help spread the word, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you.